was a cold winter night, East Palestine, the moon was bright.
I want to start our event today. My name is Steve Zeltzer. I'm with the Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers Committee. Our committee was established to defend the residents and workers of East Palestine, to get justice and to get health care and money to relocate from homes that the residents are in that are contaminated. And we have been conducting an education campaign, political campaign with the government, with the AFL-CIO, with our unions to get support for the residents and community. And on the second anniversary of this incident, this catastrophe, you would think that something would have been done to help people. But the reality is they're suffering and they're stuck in homes. They're stuck in homes that are contaminated. And we believe that this situation is intolerable, and we, our committee and the people of this country need to get justice for the people of East Palestine, because it's not just about them. Every person is threatened if these people don't get health care and the money to move out of their homes. And so we see this campaign as a human rights issue, as a labor issue, and also the people that have been involved in coming to East Palestine to clean up and even to investigate. EPA workers were contaminated, they got sick. CDC workers were contaminated, they got sick. And yet, they're not getting justice, and we don't even know who they are. We're going to first start with two residents, and then we're going to be having other speakers. The first resident is Chris Albright. He's a resident, and his family lives close to the wreck. And also, he's a member of the laborers, and he was a pipeline worker. So welcome, Chris Albright.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody coming here. I want to thank the hotel, the Fairfield Inn here in Austintown, for having us here. Thank you guys for taking some time out of your day to come here. Some of the things I'd like to talk about very quickly, like Steve said, is yes, I do live less than a half a mile away from where the train derailed. I have suffered greatly over the past 2 years. I've had, congestive heart failure, which turned into severe heart failure. My whole family has had issues. You're going to hear from a couple different people tonight that are going to hopefully give you guys some insight on what really happened here, from former railroad workers and from different people in the community and what has happened. Some of the things, though, is that, like Steve said, since this 2-year train derailment, the anniversary of it is coming up, nothing in the past 2 years has changed. Nothing has changed. They're still doing the same things they did back then. And until we can make them realize that it's still a danger, that they're making the trains longer and faster and, and heavier, this is going to happen again. This is going to happen again. I guarantee you this will happen again unless they change something. I don't want to see that happen to anybody. Nobody at all. This is what happened to us was a tragedy, and I don't want to see anybody go through this again. It's something that should have never happened. It could have been avoided. You're going to hear about some different ways it could have been avoided, and yet the railroad came in and told everybody that they did everything they could to stop it, which they didn't. You're going to hear about how the EPA and our government agencies lied to us, completely abandoned us, and told us that we were safe and that we were okay, and we're not. We're not. We're 2 years down the road. We're not safe in our own town, in our own homes. The place that you should feel safe is not safe. I've been through a whole lot the past 2 years. Like I said, I went through severe heart failure. I really thought by now I'd be dead, to be honest with you. I thought I was going to die. I went through Google, and they gave me less than 2 years to live. And I got a little girl sitting right here that I thought that I'd never see her graduate. I'd never see her walk down the aisle. I'd never see her go to college, any of that. That's a hell of a feeling to be a parent and think that you're not going to be there for your kids. This is all due to something that could have been avoided, due to something that I had no control over. This was done by somebody else. And like I said earlier, this will happen again. I can almost promise you it will happen again. You're going to hear people almost testify to the fact that this will happen again. And it doesn't need to. We need to reach out to our government officials. We need to reach out to the president. We need to get the Stafford Act enacted right now. For those that are unfamiliar with it, the Stafford Act will give us health care for the rest of our lives. It will give us the ability to relocate if you would like to relocate. It's going to help us out a lot, and I don't think that anybody should be left in East Palestine. And I definitely think that we are all going to need health care for the rest of our lives. You're going to hear from a toxicologist who's going to explain some of the dangers of the chemicals we were exposed to, and what they cause. And this has been the guy is an expert witness in his field. He has appeared in over 50 different cases, and he's going to tell you about what happened here and what he knows to be true. You're going to hear from a couple different residents who will give you their own life story and what happened to them. So I'm going to keep it a little bit brief, and thank you guys for being here and listen for this, and reach out to your government officials. We definitely need your support, and we definitely don't want this to happen again.
I wanted to thank everybody for coming and joining us for the East Palestine Residents and Workers National Austintown, Ohio Conference. This is a very important conference, and unfortunately this has happened, but we have had the opportunity to unite across the United States in support of the folks in East Palestine and workers who have been tragically affected by this terrible derailment. My name is Penny Logson. I'm a proud member of the International Painters and Allied Trades Public Professional Maintenance Employees Local 2003. I'm president of the Lee County Labor Chapter. Tomorrow, February 2nd, 2025, will be 2 years since the catastrophic Norfolk Southern freight train pulling 150 cars, including 38 tanker cars, carrying chemicals, including the devastating vinyl chloride chemicals, derailed in the village of East Palestine, Ohio. Sunday, February 5th, there was a mandatory evacuation. Monday, February 6th, the Norfolk Southern Railroad made the decision to incinerate the derailed cars, creating a chemical reaction and bloom like clouds, spreading the toxic chemicals across several states. Today's residents are still stuck in contaminated homes where they have been continuing to suffer from toxic materials released from the Norfolk Southern ignition and the highly dangerous chemicals. There have been fish that were killed, animals that were killed, and unfortunately, 150 people from East Palestine have died out of 4,658 just in the last 2 years. Justice for East Palestine had their first meeting January 20th of 2024. And since that time, we have been reaching out to our fellow union members, allies, chemists, chemical people, specialists, air and toxic chemical, environmentalists, all kinds of organizations across the United States that understand how dangerous it is when you allow a company to cause this much devastation to a small community and then not take the responsibilities that they should. Today, we're going to hear from the experts and residents and also union activists and allies. And they're going to talk about what has happened in the last 2 years what did not happen that should have regarding the EPA and other government organizations. And today we are going to stand united to demand that East Palestine, Ohio be declared a mass casualty incident site and J.D. Vance enact the Stafford Act so the residents and workers will be eligible for federally funded health care. I want to thank everyone who has participated in the Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers campaign, and we will continue to work until this declaration of this Stafford Act has been enacted. And I also wanted to have the privilege to introduce Steve Zeltzer, who will be our MC today. Steve has interviewed workers throughout the world and is the producer of Workweek and Pacifica, and has done a tremendous job not only covering what has happened to these folks in East Palestine and across the states, Pennsylvania and elsewhere. He has dedicated much time throughout this year. And I just want to say thank you, Steve, for all the work that you have done, and also to the residents. I'm so proud of the residents because they have never for a moment stood there and pitied themselves. They have fought, they've united, they've wrote letters, they have went to the Washington several times to try and do something to make life livable in East Palestine, Ohio. And if it's not going to be, then we need to have the funds for them to be relocated. And it's certainly within the financial capabilities of Norfolk Southern to be able to get that done. By enacting the Stafford Act, the government would provide health care, and they would also provide funds for relocation. Then they could, if they so choose, go back to Norfolk Southern and recoup their funds. But the most important thing is that our union brothers and sisters, their friends, their neighbors, have the opportunity for federally funded government health care. And again, thank you for coming, and thank you, Steve, for all the work that you've done. And we appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Penny, for joining us. And I think that there are many other people in this country that support the people of East Palestine. But we've had a battle, as everyone knows, to get this information out. In fact, what we're going to be hearing today is the fact that people don't have health care, and they've been damaged, and that they're sick 2 years after this incident. And we all know that Vice President Vance is coming here. He made a lot of promises that when he was running, even before he was a candidate for vice president, that he would take care of the people here in East Palestine. So we believe that tomorrow, when he has a press conference, the voices of the residents should be heard, the people who have been affected. This is not for the politicians. This is for the people to speak out on how they've been affected. That's what we believe. And we are going to continue this campaign, which we began under the Biden administration, to make sure that they get justice, they get health care, and they get money to move out. Regardless of who's president, people have a right to health care, and people have a right to safe communities. And there are many other communities that are put in jeopardy by the deregulation of the railroads, by these rail wrecks that are happening, over 1,500 since the East Palestine incident. We have to ask ourselves, the American people have to ask themselves, how have we had 1,500 derailments since East Palestine? How could that be? How could that be? And we'll have some speakers who will talk about directly how that is. So our next speaker is another resident, a fighter and organizer, Krista Graves, and she has also been trying to get the truth out, organizing and trying to break this information blockade so the people of this country and the government know what is happening and do something about it. So welcome, Krista.
Thank you, Steve. And I want to thank everybody who's here, everybody who traveled to come here, and all of our community members who we continue to show up as often as we can, as many events as we can, with the support of so many wonderful people that we never imagined we would have had the blessing of knowing. A lot of people don't know, we still have people who are not in their homes, people who are in various types of relocation. Some have found a second home, maybe they bought it, maybe it was left to them, and they're in drastic need of help. They're not the same home, they're fixer-uppers. They have problems, and their home in East Palestine is still theirs. They don't want to sell their home in East Palestine for somebody else to come and get sick in, which has happened to a family that I know who moved in September of 23. I myself am looking to leave the area. I have fought for 2 years to get the buyout that I believe should have happened in the beginning. I remember hearing on the news, I believe it was on Tuesday, the 7th, following the detonation, but I'm not 100% sure, Trent say that there was talk of a 1 to 2 mile buyout. I cannot find that anymore. But I believe that's what should have happened when I look back at Love Canal and Times Beach and some of the other communities. We have residents in Pennsylvania who weren't given any direction on what to do. They weren't necessarily evacuated. They weren't really told to shelter in place or not. And there was no warning to not travel towards East Palestine and towards the contamination. I know several people from Pennsylvania, a little farther out than our little border towns, that drove to Chippewa and into Darlington not knowing that this danger was there. And now they're sick and have symptoms related to it. There's so many ways that it has failed. I live on the outside of East Palestine, and when I evacuated on Sunday night, I saw a heavy haze hanging in the air. It wasn't smoke. It reflected oddly in the headlights. It wasn't the same as fog. And as I traveled down the hill into Nagley, it got thicker and thicker and thicker until I could barely see, I'd say 4 to 6 feet in front of me. When I got to where I was going, I called everybody I could think of and told them to wake up everybody they could think of and tell them to go. But they didn't warn Nagley either, and Nagley still wasn't spoken about. Recently, I've learned of a gentleman, Tom, who lives on a hill in Nagley, and he couldn't see his barn because the cloud was at ground level with him. His apples grew up black out of the trees that year. And now he's on oxygen at 84 years old. He was healthy before this. He hiked with his daughter. There's so many stories that aren't heard. So many people that don't know who to reach out to or don't know that they should. Maybe they're the only ones having this problem. So many of us have made friends and connections that we never imagined. But there's more than just vinyl chloride in that derailment. There are multiple chemicals that George Thompson will cover, but there are also Ford Maverick trucks with EV batteries. If anybody knows what it's like to burn an EV battery and the toxins involved in that, that's an incident all of its very own. I do very much encourage everybody to use the governmental system of our representatives, writing campaigns, unified, together, trying to, okay, this date, try to have everybody send a letter by this date. It works if we are consistent and if we continue to do it. I have seen it work in the past, and it gets discouraging. It does, but it does work if you're consistent, if your message is true. I just can't thank everybody here enough for coming. And hopefully we'll be able to get our families relocated without endangering other families. That feels very wrong. Something I remember hearing in one of the presentations was that when you mow the grass, you're shifting all of this back up into the air. My dad passed in September, and he was so proud that he had been mowing the grass and weed eating. He had bad joints, and that was quite an accomplishment. And then he was puttering around in the garage. Now, this isn't a chemical garage. This is a garage full of stored items. And they went camping for a weekend and got away from the area while they were tearing down those blue tanks. And within 2 hours, a few hours of coming back to the area, he developed symptoms we would later learn were heart failure. And he spent the last month of his life in the hospital. He swore to us not very long before that, "I was born in Ohio and I will die in Ohio." He was not a sick man. He was the healthiest Vietnam vet I ever knew. He died in Pittsburgh. He didn't even get that basic wish. I told him, "Dad, your mother lived to be 94 years old. Why are you acting like this at 77? You and Mom are independent. You travel." And then like that, he is faced with a very similar fate that Chris thankfully made it through that. Not everybody has. And we don't have any answers. We don't know for sure what happened. You know, there seems to be an uptick in passings in our area, but we don't know for sure that they're related. We need to know, and we need to protect our children and our elderly, everybody. My grandchildren, Evie's grandchildren, these chemicals can affect generations down, and that's what I'm concerned with. When they say health care, we need health care, but we need multiple disciplinary health care. We need to be able to see a variety of practitioners, because it's not always going to be so simple as going to the medical doctor and getting a pill. You might need a detox protocol that isn't part of standard medical. You might need a new procedure that is just coming out and isn't available in your area, under your coverage, or even in your country. We need to be able to travel across the country if somebody says, "Hey, I'll take a look at you if you can get here." So there's a lot of needs and a lot of unanswered questions. Something I learned when I learned about Times Beach and got to know Marilyn Leisner, they weren't allowed to take anything from their homes. Her mom's china is buried in that mound. No toothbrush, no underwear, no Christmas tree, no presents, no baby pictures. It's all buried in that mound. What do we take with us when we leave? Are we in a similar situation? We don't know. Some people were told, throw away everything fabric. Some people were told, throw away everything plastic that will come in contact with your mouth. Some people weren't told anything. Then EPA says that all you need to do is dry wipe everything you have. You know, there's just such a mixed message and a lack of messaging and a lack of consistency. And they tell us we're fine. They tell us we're safe, our homes aren't contaminated, and our environment isn't contaminated. But if I spend more time outside, I have different symptoms, more symptoms, and they're not simple allergy symptoms. I know what those are. So it's not just that the homes are contaminated or potentially contaminated. It seems that the outdoor environment is as well. So it's not just a matter of, remodeling homes and maybe making them more airtight. It's when you walk out. It's still there. So with that, I thank everybody who has joined us along the fight, whether they're here in this meeting room or whether they're watching on Zoom or they'll catch us at another date. We have met some of the most amazing people along the way, and I will take that as the blessing.
Our next speaker is a toxicologist who has been investigating the ignition of these chemicals and also what the effects are for the residents and for workers. And, it's interesting in this country, we have the science to find out what's in Mars, what's on the surface of Mars, but we can't seem to find out what's going on with people in this country who are being contaminated. I find that a real serious question, that we have the technology to find out about what's happening in Mars, but we can't find out what's happening right here to the people of this country. And George Thompson is a longtime toxicologist who has been struggling to protect the people of this country who've been affected by toxins and has done a serious study on what has happened as a result of the ignition of all these chemicals in East Palestine. So welcome, George.
I'm a toxicologist with going on 56 years of experience now. And I've published 21 books on chemical hazards. All of my career in those 56 years has been performing chemical hazard assessments. Sometimes, much of the time, of individual chemicals, but not in the case here of what was released in East Palestine. And the as I sat and watched my TV each night back in February 3rd of 23 for that week, I was amazed at the images that I was seeing on my television.
Good, it's still running. When it stops running, then it's
Okay.
okay.
Then you coming back.
Yep.
All right, so I'm making the food and you can
Wait,
eat.
wait. Can people please mute themselves? Okay. Continue, George.
So as I watched this, I was amazed at the volume of the plumes and the extent of the fire, and it just went on every night when I would sit to watch TV that this story was on. And one of the principles, the basic principles of toxicology, is called the precautionary principle. And although there are various definitions, I've highlighted one here from the University of Michigan. When we do not know for certain that there will not be damaging effects of substances, especially those that are persistent and toxic in the environment, it is best to err on the side of precaution. That is to prevent exposure rather than try to clean up or cure the negative health effects of an environmental exposure after it has occurred. Now that's not something I invented. It's not new. This has existed for decades as the premise when there is uncertainty and but significant risk. And I was aware of that. I've used that concept many times in the work that I've done. And then I stumbled more recently across a statement from the Boston University School of Medicine that I thought described your situation in East Palestine very well. When they said that one of the conspicuous casualties in the war against toxic chemicals is the public's regard for public health officials. More often than anyone would like, frustrated and concerned citizens have received little sympathy, understanding, or help from local, state, or federal health agencies. Instead, officials have tried to minimize public concern, often irrespective of the situation. Departments of public health have become departments of public reassurance. I think a few of you there have heard that everything's safe and you're okay. Doesn't matter what you feel or the circumstances you're in. And so on February 3rd, when the fire first started, as I said, I was drawn into this because of the visual images on the news, the quantities of those plumes, and that it went on and on. And I was surprised that on the 8th of February, only 5 days after this whole thing started, EPA and Ohio state officials lifted the evacuation order. I was amazed. And then more critically, a week later, on the 15th of February, EPA and Ohio basically reported that the air, water, and soil was safe. And as an experienced toxicologist, I knew that that was not true. It could not possibly be true. Because from my experience, there was information that was required before you conclude that it's safe. And I've listed here, and I won't go through all of them, but the first thing you need to identify what was in the rail cars and what was produced by the incomplete combustion of those materials. Incomplete combustion means that it's a fire with smoke coming out. And anytime you see smoke, whether you're burning in the backyard or any place, when you see a plume of smoke, that means you're not burning everything that's is serving as fuel. And one of my friends that many of you know, named Scott Smith, who is the man in the blue shirt, I think wisely said to me in early 2023, when we started talking about his chemical findings, you can't find what you don't look for. And that's a big problem in this situation in East Palestine, because neither Norfolk Southern nor EPA wanted to find that this was a hazardous, polluted environment. But coming back to the required information for me as a toxicologist, there should have been comprehensive air analyses and soil and water analysis. Those should have been done before this announcement of safety on the 15th of February is made. And I knew within a week's time that was impossible to have done all that work. So it wasn't based upon science, that statement. It was based upon preference. So I decided at that time in 2000, on February 3rd, when this started, I was retired. And that realization that what they were saying was not true motivated me then to look at this and make my own opinion. And so I went online to the Norfolk Southern website and downloaded their manifest for this train. That manifest was not available on their website by the 13th of March when I went back to see if they had an updated version. But this manifest is where they identified 9 types of information that were in it. They started with each individual rail car, identifying 52 that were derailed, the types of rail cars, their classification, and most importantly, the Norfolk Southern class status of the car relative to fire. The ones in red here, for example, indicate that there was some type of fire connotation related to, those are different statements that were used for each of these 52 car labels. So they identified there were 52 cars derailed. There were 17 cars that burned in this manifest. There were 15 additional cars that were what they call impinged by fire, some kind of negative effect. So that's a total of 31 out of the 52 cars were involved in this burning. I then searched some of the publications that show where I can find a picture. One of the pictures showed there were 25 burned cars on both sides of the 2 sides of the track. And I found other pictures where there were 24 in one and 4 in another, different cars. So at 28. So that I felt that these numbers, 25 to 28, were pretty close to what Norfolk Southern indicated in their manifest. So then I said, as a toxicologist, since I created this table and all of the information over here to acute health, all of this other information comes from the manifest. So I took the name of the product or chemical, how they identify it by its number, its chemical number, the number of cars that were associated with that, the type of cars, and the rail status. So here's where the burn comes in, leaked, etc. This information is all from the manifest. Then I took this information of the chemical or product identity and I researched to see what the acute health, the chronic health, and the air, water, soil, environmental effects of that chemical or product would be listed in the scientific literature. And I'm only going to talk about a few of these. They're just too many to cover in the time that I've been allotted. But you will notice that the first two, the polypropylene and the polyethylene, were both inert pellets. They were in hopper cars, and in essence, they're innocuous. They're not hazardous at all in the hoppers. Another one I want to pick here is semolina flour. When I first saw the label in the manifest of semolina, I had no idea what it was. But when I looked it up, I found out that this is pizza flour. It's a special kind of ground up grain that's used to make pizza dough. And the science said that it was, as a dust, it was irritating to the skin, eye, throat, and lungs. So if you're inhaling that dust, it's an irritant. And if you do that over a long period of time, the chronic effects here, it's an allergy. it can cause a condition that the clinicians and medical doctors call baker's asthma by just inhaling this dry dust. Now, in summarizing this, I identified 24 different chemicals and products in this manifest. The last one that I'm going to mention here are point out down here that there was one car, number 58, of frozen vegetables. Now, I didn't have any information over here because frozen vegetables, unless you have some sort of allergy to a specific vegetable, there aren't acute or chronic health effects, and they're not going to produce any effects in the environment. If you spilled them, they would just decompose back into soil. And so I looked at all of these 24 different classes, line by line, one at a time. I'll come back to summarize. You'll notice on this portion, the first 1 through 13, that there are 3 chemicals or products that were known to cause cancer. And on this summary table beyond, there are 5 more. So the chemical contents of the rail cars included 8 chemicals that could potentially cause cancer. I don't know of any of the publications that I've seen that mention that. Many of them, which I didn't mention to you, talked about vinyl chloride. This is one where it was mentioned that it potentially causes liver cancer. None of the other potential cancer chemicals that were in the cars did I ever read in the public information available. Now, as a toxicologist, one of the questions is, what about exposure? Those are in the cars. What's the chances that people would be exposed to those particular chemicals or products? Well, in my analysis, I've identified significantly more than 4 times the people in the area were exposed to these chemicals and products. The one is on the 3rd of February when this all started. And this produced a massive plume. I watched it all week long. And it's releasing these hazardous chemicals and initial incomplete combustion products. So this is an ongoing all the time in your neighborhood that you could see that smoke cloud coming up. That's filled with hazardous chemicals. Then, as all of you probably know, on the 6th of February, they decided, literally a committee decided, that they were going to drain the vinyl chloride, this potential carcinogen and explosive, it's a potential explosive, and burn it. And they call that a controlled burn. But when you saw the effects on the 6th, it was anything but controlled. It was an uncontrolled burn. Surprised everybody that it was so messy. And so it was really a massive release of these incomplete combustion hazardous chemicals. And so that led me to say, okay, what are these incomplete combustion hazardous chemicals? I'm not a combustion chemical toxicologist. I didn't know the answer to that. That was a question. And I decided that I better look into that. But after the 6th, this fire burned for a couple of days and then it was extinguished. Shortly after the 13th, they began digging up the railroad base and different burn areas nearby so they can get the railroad running again. I have never heard anyone talk about the re-release of these hazardous chemicals that were released up here the 3rd through about the 7th or 8th of February. You're re-releasing all that stuff because it's in the dirt. It's also, we've learned, has drained into the water. And then another time, which I say is the 4th one that I know of, is that in 2024, this is a year later, more than a year later, they started blasting the stream banks and stirring up the sediment numerous different times. And I don't know how many times they've done this. But what does that do? It re-releases the highly hazardous chemicals that had settled out and drained from ground zero into the streams, or settled out from the massive plumes of these highly hazardous chemicals. And when you stir up that sediment in the stream banks, you're re-releasing those chemicals. So there are numerous exposures of people, and I've talked to enough people now in East Palestine to know that in each of these incidents, including the multiple times the stream banks have been treated and different hotspots have been dug up in the town, that every time they do that, every time they're digging or every time they're blasting the streams, people in town get sick again, all over again. Sometimes with the same symptoms, sometimes with worse symptoms. And so these are just a few public available images to illustrate the magnitude of this. To me, this is a very effective one because it shows that there is burning, but this stuff up here is not burned. That plume is the incomplete combustion products. In this one, and I think this one was taken on the day of the 6th of February. There's no fire visible. Certainly not up high like the one that we previously looked at. So look at the mass here of material going into the atmosphere. And you can see it up here on the edges where it's starting to accumulate. What are the outcomes? Well, here are some of these vehicles that were burned, and we've now subsequently learned that those had lithium-ion batteries in them. And lithium-ion batteries release, when they're burned, some of the most toxic chemicals. And I'll show those a little later as to what the chemicals are. So I began to question then, when I looked at the 52 cars, which ones burned, which ones were impinged, and which ones were unaffected. So I made up this graphic that identifies each car by its own color. And the colors are identified here. So all the 17 cars that they said burned are colored in red. And I've put the numbers in here for the number of that car identified in the manifest. The ones that were fire, flame, and pinch, the other 15 are in gold. Then there are these 10 at the end that originally were listed as no comment regarding fire status, but I've subsequently learned after studying and analyzing the manifest that they in fact burned. Number 65 is the auto car, rail car. You saw the pictures of those burned cars. The other 66 through 74 are malt liquor cars. And only recently, a few months back, did I learn that those are actually burned, and I've seen pictures of those to confirm it. But the original analysis, the reason that I did this analysis was to say how much, what was the quantity. And when you add up these numbers for these 31 plus 10, so that's now 41 cars that burned, the total amount of material going up in that black plume is almost 10,400,000 pounds. That's what was going into the air when you look at this. So that was a significant potential exposure. But that led me into this analysis then of what happens when the products that are in the rail cars are burned. And what would they release? So I'm just going to show you these first two that were the innocuous pellets, polypropylene, polyethylene. When you burn those, you produce this list of chemicals. Soot and ash, you can see that in the plume. Polyaromatic hydrocarbons, known as PAHs, dioxins, aldehydes. These are all produced when you burn polyethylene, which was innocuous in those rail cars, but not when they're burned. and look at the number of carcinogens that I've highlighted here. Now, unfortunately, the yellow highlighting draws your attention, which was my purpose, but there are also many other serious risks here. Cardiovascular disease, lung, asthma, heart disease, death even from some of these materials are recorded in the scientific literature. Kidney effects, liver, immune system, hormonal disruption from these chemical products. Now, the irony is that the soot and ash you could see going up in the plume. What wouldn't be known is that soot and ash act like a sponge, and they absorb these chemicals that become chemically bound to them, including persistent free radicals, which are very strong carcinogens, very reactive. But look at, just to point out here, because we'll talk about dioxins several different times, dioxins are carcinogens, and I've indicated that in yellow. But look at the number of organs where it can cause cancer. There are 8 different organs in the body where it can cause cancer. And with the polyaromatic hydrocarbons, there are 5 different organs where you can suffer cancer from exposure to those particular kinds of chemicals. The vinyl chloride down here, which was known as a product itself of being a carcinogen, but when you look at what was produced from it, you get 2 chemicals that are known to cause cancer, dioxins being one of those, and so there's 8 types of cancer you can get here, but it also releases highly corrosive hydrochloric acid from the vinyl chloride, corrosive phenol that can burn the tissues. And I've talked to enough people to know that many of you suffered this burning in your skin, eye, nose, throat, lungs. So that was a real experience that people went through. Now here's the semolina flour, the pizza flour. When it is burned, same kinds of chemicals are produced because it has the same kind of molecules in that organic structure of the flour, of the grain. And look at all of the different kinds of cancer that can be produced. Again, you have dioxins with its 8 kinds, and the aromatic hydrocarbons with their 5 types of cancer. So many of these things that were on the train, when they decided that they were going to ignite the vinyl chloride, they were going to drain and ignite it, and then that ignited all of those burning and impinged cars. They released numerous highly hazardous chemicals, including chemicals that can cause cancer. Now, here's one on petroleum lube oil. I just want to talk here about these many other toxins. They are not in this list. These are the kinds of chemicals that are released when this is burned. But in order to have this held at 4 pages, I didn't list all of those, but there are many others that could have been listed. Let's see, I want to go to, now this one, I just want to emphasize, here at the bottom is the frozen vegetables, something that we would eat and give us energy. But look at the chemicals that are released when they're burned in an incomplete combustion. It's almost the same as the polyethylene, polypropylene, the same kinds of chemicals, and the number of cancers that they can cause. So when you put what are normally innocuous materials in a fire, you're generating very toxic chemicals. And so that became a big concern to me. In this particular chart, to focus on just part of the data, the most serious health concerns from the rail car content were 8 chemicals that cause cancer, 8 that cause allergies, and the number here that cause kidney, liver, and lung conditions and reproductive effects. That's from the products in the rail car. But now look over here when you get the incomplete combustion products. I've been able to identify approximately 120 chemicals that cause cancer, not 8. 5 more allergens than over here. 11 more reproductive effects. And then here are all these other organs that are affected by the chemicals that are produced by incomplete emission products. One of the interesting features is that on the 3rd of April, 2 months after the start of the fire, there were 7 workers from the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta came up to evaluate the circumstances in East Palestine and came down with what was called a mystery illness during their investigation. So 2 months afterwards, people were still getting poisoned by the chemicals in the community. They weren't gone. It wasn't what the EPA administrator or the Ohio Department of Health said. And I've talked to probably a dozen or more attorneys that went to East Palestine to recruit clients for lawsuits that became sick, just like these CDC workers. This wasn't a surprise to me because I'd heard it already from so many people, the attorneys. And so what is the problem for East Palestine? The problem is what I call the chemical stew. I've never seen this before in 55 years of my experience. When you have this fire and this massive plume going for 5, 6 days, what's being released in that are all kinds of chemicals, hundreds of chemicals. And when you think about the intensity of this heat, the chemicals that I've listed here that I have identified as incomplete combustion products are also going to react. So aldehydes are not just going to go out as aldehydes, they're going to react with other chemicals that are in here, perhaps with formic acid or acetic acid or hydrochloric acid. And so you've got reactions that are occurring here from the products themselves. And this could go on ad nauseum. It's just what I can say is that there are hundreds of chemicals that were released by this incomplete combustion into the fires. And so one of the next questions logical to a toxicologist is, what are the effects? What are the evidence of effects? And early on, when I started looking into this, I got contacted by a lady that lives about 10 miles northwest of East Palestine, ground zero. And within hours after they ignited the vinyl chloride on the 6th, her chickens died. They were outside, and just from their normal pen, breathing the air, they died. And I've accumulated other animal effects. All of you probably know there were over 43,000 dead fish and amphibians in the East Palestine streams. So there's something poisonous being released from that rail mishap. Dead and injured foxes that were near in the outskirts of East Palestine. Dead and deformed purebred dogs. I just learned about that very recently because lawsuits by these dog breeders have now been filed against Norfolk Southern. And I emphasize here that one of the deformed descriptions was a dog born with 2 heads. Now, Kristen commented in her statement today that she's worried about her grandkids. What happens here for young people that are living in the area, were exposed, and they're going to have babies, or their babies are going to have babies? How far does this go? We don't know. But what we do know from the animal species involved is that the chemicals are potent enough that it produce these effects. In Pennsylvania, there were cows reported to have diarrhea when they were previously healthy before the derailment. And one pig farmer in the East Palestine area couldn't sell his pigs because the buyers were concerned that they were contaminated. So he had to actually destroy them. That's evidence that we know exists and shows how hazardous these chemicals are. Now I'm going to run through some lists to just illustrate points. I'll be fairly quick about this, but one of the standard symptoms that I've been reported to me are the irritation and corrosion of the skin, eye, nose, throat, and lungs. Here on this chart, I've shown you the chemicals that I've identified in the combustion products that can produce these symptoms in your skin, eye, nose, throat, and lungs. Similarly, if we look at the neurologic effects, the brain overall body control effects, here are the symptoms: headache, dizzy, fainting, weakness, judgment problems, coordination loss, seizures, coma. These are all symptoms that were reported. Look at the number of chemicals that can cause those that were released in the plume. Quite a few. 20 types of cancer were identified in the fire generated chemicals. And just to show you the list, it starts up here with brain and it runs down here all the way through skin. All of these different types of cancer. Now, I just want you to look here at the same concept I've illustrated on the other charts. If you look at the nose, nasopharynx cancers and the lung cancer, look at the number of chemicals that can produce those kinds of cancers. And many of you have these symptoms of irritation in the nose, throat, and lungs. And if those chemicals are in your body, then you may come down with these kinds of cancers down the road. And to make matters worse, some of the chemicals promote cancers. They don't cause cancer themselves, but by being exposed at the same time you're exposed to chemicals that can cause cancer, they promote the creation of that cancer. And then there are hormone disruptors. These particular chemicals, PAHs and dioxins, are known as forever chemicals. You get them in your body and they don't leave for decades or longer. And the same thing, if they're in the soil, they can be there for up to 100 years, depending upon the depth in the soil. So, although these are not emotional topics, they can have very serious long-term health effects. Now, I've talked a lot about dioxins. That's been some of the focus of Scott Smith's assessments. This is just one illustration that EPA said would not happen. Scott was able to obtain samples of garlic before the derailment and 3 months after the derailment and analyze them for the dioxin furan levels. These are different types of dioxins and furans. And you'll notice here that before the derailment, 14 parts per trillion is the highest number. But look what it is 3 months after. Many orders of magnitude greater. And this is in garlic. So what happens if people eat this garlic and consume these high levels of dioxins that won't leave their bodies? And I re-emphasize that there are 8 different kinds of cancer that are caused by dioxins. And as search as I could to find out what's the safe level, the only safe level I could find was from FDA. I was looking for safe level in food, was FDA, and they had only a level in fish and shellfish, not from vegetables. And notice that it's less than 50 parts per trillion is FDA's limitation. But look at these over here. This particular furan is at 4,400 parts per trillion compared to less than 50. So again, another indication that that there was concern about. And then another question I had is who's exposed? And so I wanted to study these pictures again that are in the public domain of the plume coming up and dispersing. But you'll notice that it's flat. It doesn't just keep going up. It's flat because there was a temperature inversion. So that prevented it from going higher. And I understand that's about 3,000-foot elevation. But there are a number of these. You look at the different, now look at the breadth of this plume going up and spreading out. Here's another version, a little further away. I think this, I remember this is taken in Pennsylvania, but you can see here, that's a broad plume. And an airplane flying over East Palestine area, somebody took this picture from the airplane. Don't have any idea the dimensions this is, but you can see here that it's slowly bleeding out of this major plume. Now, when EPA was doing their testing with the contractors, using this Norfolk Southern contractors, on the 6th of February, the day they were going to ignite the vinyl chloride, prior to the burn in the morning, they ran this air dispersion model. And this is what they said here. It's that if they ignited it here, here's where the products would disperse. And death possible, injury possible, different types of injury possible. This was their prediction in the morning. But one of the affidavits of the chemist that the plaintiff's attorneys in this lawsuit hired reported in his affidavit that in the morning, that picture you just saw is indicating that this is the direction of the contaminant release from igniting that, what they call the control burn. That was in the morning. At noon, the air was calm, so it wasn't going to go this way. And by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the wind was actually going northeast instead of southeast. The problem that this created is that they took their samples, the contractors for the EPA and Norfolk Southern took their samples expecting that this was going to be the concentrated area of contamination. And this they used as their background. And so what happened is that the levels found here were much higher than the levels found here. And they labeled this as background was much higher than the contamination, when in fact, they didn't realize that they had it reversed. This was the actual contamination, and this was the background. And so much of their interpretation was upside down. I looked at two other plume dispersion models. This one is very busy and hard to read, but all I want to emphasize to it is that this is the thing I liked about this one is it was hour by hour, 24/7, and it started on the 4th of February at 2 in the morning, shortly after the fire started, and it ran all the way through the 7th of February until 2 in the afternoon. And so I've simply summarized it here. But if you notice that the plume, here's Northwest Pennsylvania, Western New York, here's Canada, down here is West Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. Now, notice also, this is the 6th when they set that fire. And so these areas down here were after they've set that burn. And then on Tuesday the 7th, you'll see this is dispersed across Lake Erie, southern Ontario, peninsula to Lake Huron. Massive dispersion. And I counted from analyzing this that there were 8 states that would have been covered by this plume at some time during this 5-day period. I eventually found another publication of air dispersion that anticipated or defined that it covered 16 states. It wasn't just East Palestine. This plume went in a lot of different directions, and not just southeast, but west, etc. And I remind you that the 5 chickens that died were 10 miles northwest of East Palestine, not southeast, which was what was thought to be the prevailing wind direction. Won't go into detail here. This is court lawsuit kinds of information. But the bottom line is that there were a number of areas where criminal prosecution could have occurred. That has not happened yet, but I under progress now. The key element here is that the NTSB chairwoman, Jennifer Hongety, clearly stated that this was 100% preventable. And there were all elements to that warranted a criminal type of consideration. I won't say more about that.
One of the issues that we're bringing up here today on the anniversary is that, and I mentioned it earlier, there have been over 1,500 derailments since the incident in East Palestine. And one of the things that's going on today with the airline wrecks is the issue of safety, health and safety. And we in this country have reason to be fearful about what's happening with our infrastructure. In the Bay Area, there are accidents, there are fires. In fact, today there's a uncontrolled fire in Martinez at a refinery. So we're in jeopardy. Our health and safety is in jeopardy, and these incidents are directly the result, in our view, in my view, of the lack of regulation, the lack of health and safety, and protecting the workers who do the job to protect us. So I think this is very important. And our next speaker is Jeff Kurtz. He's a BNSF retired engineer with the BLET, and he was the Iowa State Legislative Director, and he's with Railroad Workers United. So welcome to Jeff.
One of the things I want to talk, I was a BNSF engineer. I hired out on the Santa Fe out of Fort Madison, Iowa, back in 1974. I was a union officer almost my whole career, and in 2004 I was elected to be the state chairman for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen in Iowa, and I had 4 railroads under my jurisdiction, and I handled safety and legislative matters in Iowa and kind of around the country because our state chairman had an association, and I was vice president of our National Association of state chairman for a couple of years too. So that's my background. And then after I retired in 2014, I stayed active in the labor movement. And in 2018, I served a term as a state representative in Iowa for my House district. And so I come at this from a lot of different directions. And one of the things, when I was a union officer, one of the things as state chairman that I used to do is read a lot of the FRA. If I start using acronyms, you don't know what they are, stop me and I'll translate them. But I used to read the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA reports, and NTSB reports, National Transportation Safety Board reports, because a lot of times quite frankly, they look like they were prepared by people that didn't understand how railroads work. I see you nodding over there, Chris, because I'm sure you've seen the same things. And I think this report on the derailment of 32N illustrates that perfectly, because there was the 212-page report itself said very little about the operation of the railroads and the operation of that train in particular, and concentrated on things like inward-facing cameras, which are absolutely the wrong direction to go. I'll get into that later in this presentation. They should get rid of those damn things. It focused on that, and it focused on tank cars and tank car types. In fact, it went on for pages and pages. It kind of reminded me of when I was in school, and our teachers would say, okay, you've got a 15-page report that's due in a month, and it has to be at least 15 pages long. So you'd look for filler to put in that report. That's what this tank car stuff is. I started reading that. I had to put it down because it meant absolutely nothing to the derailment. I mean, the way to keep tank cars from being punctured is to prevent derailments. I mean, that's, I don't know, that just seems simple to me. So, let me see. One of the things that I was shocked that this was left out of the NTSB's report. There were submissions by SMART Transportation Division, which it's sheet metal workers. SMART TD represents mainly conductors. It's got a few engineers in it. And the BLET, which is my home union, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. But one of the things that they talked about in there was the need to reduce the size of these trains. I mean, this is, I think this is so elementary. This shouldn't even be up for argument. You know, a 2-mile long train, a 3-mile long train is almost impossible to control. The longer and heavier these trains get, the more options they take away from you. And so if something goes wrong with a train that big, it goes really, really wrong. The evidence is in East Palestine. So that was, and the NTSB, aside from in the beginning of their 212-page report, when they gave us the size of the train, 9,300 feet long and 18,000 tons, nothing ever more was said about the size of trains or reducing the size of trains or anything else. Look through the whole 212 pages yourself. You're not going to find anything. And that's typical of a lot of things that the FRA and the NTSB do. They have us there, like with the BLET, it's called a safety task force that works with the NTSB over accidents that involve, it's a certain dollar amount, and I'm not sure what it is anymore. But when they investigate that stuff, or when there's a fatality, and they will accept a representative from the BLET, from their safety task force. The problem being they don't listen to them. They get them there. It's mostly a dog and pony show. We found that out in Chatsworth, California, and I believe that wreck was in 2007, because a good friend of mine was the head of our safety task force there, Scott Palmer, and he has never had anything good to say about that investigation. And in fact, out of that investigation came a lot of bad things. The 2007 Federal Rail Safety Act came out of Chatsworth, and it had some good things, but some bad things. But they don't follow the legislation. I can point to places. In fact, in this wreck, you could point to places where the government should have been regulating it according to the legislation then, and they weren't. And so I've had my battles with these people, and I can't say I'm a fan in any way, shape, or form. But another thing that was left out of the NTSB report on this, on their 212-page submission, it was in, I think it was page 6 of the BLET submission. They talked about this train came out of Decatur, and the train crew in Decatur had made a comment on the radio that this was an awful big train, especially with all this hazardous material in it. And they said, yeah, okay, we're, duly noted. Your concerns are duly noted. And I think it was 4, 5, 6 hours down the road, this train had what we call an unplanned train separation. In other words, it broke in two spontaneously. And from what it looks like, I think page 6 says it broke in two. It was going 32 miles an hour when it broke in two. And what that is caused by is the in-train forces from these large trains and from the way they're made up too. And so I thought that was, I'm not sure why they left that out, because that, I think that should have been their first clue that something was wrong with this train. If it spontaneously just comes apart, if you've ever been around a railroad, and no, it's well, unfortunately, it's more normal now than it used to be. But if you've ever been around a railroad, you look at the coupling system. The things that come together like that, we call them knuckles. They are made of 60, 70 pounds of iron, just pure iron. And to do any damage to something like that is just, it takes a tremendous amount of force. Those knuckles are hooked onto an assembly that is called a drawbar. The drawbar weighs about 400 pounds, and to break a drawbar or yank one out of a car, it's mind-boggling the force it takes. But that's what's been going on these railroads, especially with these long trains. And that's why you'll hear me talk about in-train forces, or you'll hear me talk about slack, because in my mind, that's probably the biggest cause of these derailments. In fact, since I've been retired for...
Slack, you said?
Huh?
Slack?
Slack. That's what we call it.
What does that mean?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. Slack is... When you have a train, as an engineer, your goal is to keep, and this sounds crazy, but you want to keep that train, the whole train, moving at the same speed all the time. Because when the rear end starts moving at a different speed, if it speeds up, the slack runs in. If it slows down, the slack runs out. And both times, I mean, it will actually, in fact, I'll tell a story about this. This was back in the early 80s. I was training an engineer, and I was only in my 20s at the time. And this guy was 2 years older than me, and he didn't like the fact that I was training him. But we had a train out of Fort Madison, and I told him a couple of times he'd been playing around with the throttle, and I said, for God's sake, Sam, stop playing around with that throttle. You're going to get us in trouble. Because he would play around with the throttle, the slack would run in and knock us out of the seat, and then the slack would run out, and there were a couple of times I told him, quit this. So we stopped in Joliet, Illinois. We're going to Chicago. Picked up another 50 cars. So we've got 121 cars, 7,000 tons, and I told him, I said, for God's sake, Sam, I said, when we leave here, you be very, very careful, because we've got a lot of slack in this train. So we go down the road. It's probably about 12 miles. We were in Lamont, Illinois, and there's a series of curves there, and that's about 25 miles outside of Chicago. So it's a 40-mile-an-hour stretch. So he starts playing with the throttle, and I'm thinking, oh, God. And it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and we've been on duty for like 8 or 9 hours. And so, like an idiot, I get up out of my chair, and I'm going to go over there and try to instruct him again. As soon as I stood up, that slack ran in, and if you've ever watched any of the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner shows, I was Wile E. Coyote. I ended up against the cavern wall. We've got a door right there. When I stood up, that slack ran me into that door. How I didn't break my nose, I don't know. But I hit that thing, and I slid down. And I remember the brakeman in back of me is just looking at me, and he's thinking that I'm just going to go off. And I stood up, and I'm shaking my head, and finally I looked at him, and I said, "Get out of the seat. You're done. You're just done tonight." I said, "I've had it." I said, how we stayed in one piece, I don't know. And that actually is a small train compared to the trains we run today. And this is, in fact, that the night before East Palestine happened, I was with Penny and Carrie Duncan. We had a labor chapter meeting. And after the meeting, one of the guys that was at the meeting, he was a railroad guy. He asked me to go eat afterwards, so we took off. And places got tacos on Thursday night, so we went to have tacos and run into some other railroaders that just happened to get off work. And the one guy I had known, I was really good friends with his dad. I've known his family forever. I've known him forever. And so I sat down, and we're talking about some of the things that are going on out in the railroad. And this is another thing I'm going to get to later. He's telling me about the trip optimizer that's running these trains, which is like a cruise control. And in fact, they did this just a couple of months before I quit. They absolutely told these guys they have to use this trip optimizer no matter what. And he's telling me about what it's doing to these trains, how the ride is so rough anymore, and they're getting knocked around in that cab and everything. I said, if this is the case, I said, how do you guys stay in one piece? And he said, oh, we don't. He says, we're breaking trains in two every day. I said, you're breaking trains in two every day? Because we used to break maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 trains a year in two. I said, for God's sakes, I said, is anybody doing anything about this? And he said, not that I know of. He said, if you're running the train and it breaks in two, they're coming after you. If this thing is running the train and they break it in two, which is usually what happens, they don't do a thing. So the day that East Palestine happened, I had emailed Ron Kamenko, Railroad Workers United, and I said, Ron, I don't know what's going on out there. I said, but this is really serious stuff. I said, and in fact, I think Ron still has the email. I said, but we're going to have a derailment, and we're going to have a bad one because of this. Because of the size of these trains and these forces in these trains. And it was probably, I think it was like, when did the derailment happen? 11 something? 8 o'clock. Well, so it was like an hour before that I sent the email to Ron, and then East Palestine happens. And I'm like, oh. And I pretty well suspected what the cause was. But the NTSB, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it looks like, I'm going to be kinder than that, Chris. I'm going to say that maybe they don't understand this because they did whatever they could to not put anything about in-train forces in their report. And so I just don't know how they could make out something like that and put all this stuff about tank cars and inward-facing cameras and not get to the meat of what really happened. Because, like Chris was saying, this is going to happen again. And it's going to happen because of this report. Because people think that these government agencies are protecting them. And because they're not doing what they need to do, they don't listen to us. So, one of the things that I had always preached is that we should be listened to more. And I would get into fights with the FRA about this. And in fact, that my last day on the job, I was handling an amputation we had up north in Mason City, Iowa. And the FRA sent me their summation of the what happened as far as the accident, which was totally bogus. And I wrote them I told them, I said, this is my last day on the job. And I said, I got to get this stuff off my chest. And I pretty well fried them. But this is what we get. These are the things that, this is why we can't have nice things. Because we're not getting to the meat. I mean, we're just dancing around the problems. So, the inward-facing cameras, what they do, it's probably like an 8x10 area that the engineer and conductor's in. And they've got either 3 or... I've never worked with them personally, but from... I always check my work because this stuff, it gets away from me because I haven't pulled a throttle in 10 years. But from what I understand, they've got the 3 or 4 cameras on them. In fact, that they can't even go to the bathroom in privacy because of these cameras. And these cameras tell them no more than what an event recorder does. From the time that I hired out in 1974, well, even before that, locomotives have what they call event recorders in them. And what an event recorder does is it monitors your throttle position, the braking power that you're using, if you ring the bell or blow the whistle. It monitors everything. So they don't need these inward-facing cameras. These inward-facing cameras are simply there to intimidate the people that work out there. Because of the fact that right now, and I think this is still the case, the Code of Federal Regulations has 964 pages that govern railroads, which we have to know, or we have to be familiar with. Our home railroads, like I worked for the Santa Fe and the BNSF, we had a General Code of Operating Rules that was 567 pages long. Not only that, you've got your superintendent's notices, general manager bulletins, you've got daily bulletins that come out, you've got all this stuff, and it can change in a second. So what you did 5 miles down the road that got you over the road there, 5 miles later, it could either get you fired, it can get you derailed, or it can get you killed. So this is the kind of stuff. And now with these cameras watching these guys, you're at 12 and 16 hours at a trip, you're going to do something wrong. I don't care. When you've got all these rules, you are going to do something wrong. And so these guys, when I go to talk to them, they're scared to death. And, they would love to talk. And they'll tell me things, but they'll say, my God, don't let my name get associated with this, because the railroads will come after them. And you will hear, and I had some experience with this too, that, oh yeah, well, we've got a whistleblower law for railroads. Well, yeah, they've got the law. But the railroads have figured out, I handled a case, a whistleblower case, and it was over one of these trip optimizers. And God, we had witnesses, we had them dead to rights. I mean, this guy, we crossed all our T's and dotted all our I's, and we dotted our T's and crossed our I's. We had everything. And OSHA comes back to me about 30 days later, and they said, well, this is policy, and we don't rule on policy. And I'm thinking, oh, God. And so I said, okay. I said, so if this is policy, tell me, if it was the BNSF's policy to just arbitrarily fire 10 people a month, and 8 of them happen to be whistleblowers, what would you say about that? Well, all of a sudden, something was really interesting on the floor, because they didn't want to talk to me. They're just kind of, and they said, well, you just have to keep turning this stuff in. And I said, why? I said, why should I put this guy in danger? His job's in danger, his livelihood, everything. And then you guys just throw him in the trash heap.
That justice requires not just health and what have you, but also protection for future people, that this doesn't happen, because, they're just getting longer and longer, cutting back the workforce all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's something that we could...
And you know this, Chris, if we passed legislation that said, okay, at 7 o'clock tonight, no train will leave a terminal any longer than 7,500 feet, by 7:01, we would be a much safer country. Yeah. We would. Yeah. It's that elementary. And they didn't even address this in
and they know it.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I was at the NTSB hearings here in East Palestine, the first one last year. And I went up to I can't remember who I started with. It was either NTSB or an FRA person. So there's 2 of them. And I said, why isn't the question of the length and the weight of the trains on the docket here? And they said, oh, it's got nothing to do with this. It's got nothing to do with it. That's the explanation. I'm with the Socialist Workers' Party, and through the militant newspaper we did a lot of reporting on this. And one of the leaders of our party has presented a program on this thing, which he's been campaigning on for many years, a long-time railroader. He says, you want to have, we're for trains of only 50 cars with 2 people on the head end and 2 people on the tail. One of the things that was very striking in the wake of the derailment in East Palestine, we're going out and talking to ordinary working people around East Palestine, farmers, workers, small business people, and the number of people who raised with you, where was the caboose? Historically, there used to be a caboose.
Oh, yes, there was.
That was,
yeah.
That was never raised in the NTS. Just one other thing, along with what you said on the other thing that the rail unions brought up in East Palestine, because they had, as well as the SMART and DLET, there was the BRS, the Signalman,
yeah.
And the other one,
BMW ED was, I think, involved.
No, they weren't there. There's another union. But so these are the craft unions who brought up the fact that there was, that this train never got inspected from all the way from Decatur all the way up to...
Oh, no. Yeah.
The IAM,
the machinist, okay.
Well, it was a sub.
Oh, and there's a Carmen's union too, TRC.
And
Yeah.
all these depots that train went through, where there were trained
Car inspectors, yeah.
car inspectors, and they never think. And of course, after the derailment, the FRA, always late, came in and inspected the cars, and I think that was something like 30% of the cars failed inspection. Mm-hmm. This is when they went through the train.
The ones
afterwards.
that were still standing.
Next year.
The next 2 speakers are Jamie Wallace, who is a resident and actually a union organizer. She was with SEIU 1199 at Cleveland State University, and she did a lot of organizing there of members into unions, and she retired here in East Palestine, and had to confront the catastrophe which has destroyed her life, her family, and she formed the Unity Council with another sister, and she's been fighting since that disaster to get justice and get health care. And tomorrow, when Vance comes and all the politicians come, there is going to be a rally of the residents demanding justice, demanding health care. And I'm glad we had some media here today, because the issue of health care and money to relocate is a critical issue. And that's why one of the reasons we're having this conference on the second anniversary. So she's going to speak, and also Chris Silvera, who's the Secretary Treasurer of Teamsters Local 808 in New York City. He's come out forthright. And also John Palmer is on the call. He's going to speak a little bit later, who's an international vice president. So there are unions that are taking this fight up. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. And I'm also a Teamster member now.
All right.
I just got a new job. I don't know which one. Please forgive me, but I'm officially a Teamster.
Very nice. Welcome.
Thank you. So as Steve said, I was an organizer for years as the executive board president of SEIU 1199 at Cleveland State University. The reason why I left the university after 15 years was because I found out I was pregnant. I was 42 years old. I tried to have a kid my entire life, went through medical procedures. Doctor said it would never happen. Ironically, I was at a 2-day union meeting for the executive board, and I was sitting at that meeting, and they brought lunch out. And I started getting nauseated. And I thought, there's no way at 42 years old that this just happened. So that brings it the whole way back to everything happens for a reason. I was at my union meeting, and ironically, the day before, we had some teachers in our union. And, you sit around the first day, and you're talking, getting to know people. And this woman asked me if I had kids. And I said, no, I don't. And like a lot of women, they don't ask if you want children and can have them. And she starts telling me how you have to have children and, blah, 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 blah. And I was kind of upset, and I went back to the office and told my friends. And like I said, the second day I found out that I was pregnant. And I would have never moved back to East Palestine had it not been for God sending me that miracle. I wanted to move back home immediately. I wanted my child raised in the community where I was raised. Why should I put her in daycare? I have 47 immediate family members in the 1 mile zone. My mom would drop dinner off, 3-course meal of mama's food when I got off of work. I was living the high life until the derailment happened. And I heard someone reference, about thinking that our government protects us. I was one of those people. When I was getting ready to go back to my house the first time since the derailment, I was getting ready to go back and get our meds. We didn't think to grab our meds when we ran out of the house. And before I left, my husband and I were having a discussion, and he said, what are we going to do when they lift the evacuation? I said, we're going to go home. If the EPA says it's okay, it's okay. I'm a well-educated woman. I have a Juris Doctor degree. I have my master's in public administration. My undergraduate degree is in political science. I know what the EPA does. We'll go home. As soon as I pulled in my driveway, my door is about 10 feet from Sulphur Run, which is still the most heavily contaminated creek. I live within the 1 mile zone. I pull in my driveway and the creek runs along it, and instantly, can't breathe. My throat's burning. I'm coughing. My skin's turning red. My face is on fire. And I look over and I see chemicals free flowing down the creek. I didn't need a scientist to tell me that it wasn't safe to go home. And I know that all parents love their children, and I don't know anything but the love of my miracle child, and I like to think that I love her a little harder because I waited so long. I'm a 6-foot-tall, redheaded Italian. You are not going to hurt my baby and get away with it. I always say, as mothers and as parents, we say we'd fight to the death for our child. That's not just a black bear. That's Norfolk Southern. That's the government. Another thing that I heard spoke about up here was the cameras. Guess what? They destroyed the cameras that were in that train. There was the black box, you know. You talk about this black box, and people always hear it in airplane crashes. They recovered the black box. Not only did Norfolk Southern record over it, it was against the direct orders of NTSB, asked them to preserve it. They immediately put this train back into operation and recorded over all but 5 minutes. So if you're not going to keep them after a crash, why would they have the cameras? You know, another interesting thing that I found out during NTSB, probably the only thing that I didn't know for my own investigation, was that hazmat trains are put on special routes. This train going through East Palestine was not even marked as hazardous. But NTSB said had it been marked hazardous, it would have still went through East Palestine. So they reroute these most hazardous trains through rural areas, where it's mostly volunteer fire departments that in the state of Ohio do not have to be hazmat trained. And that's part of what I want to do now is open people's eyes. Like we just said, you know, this isn't just about me. This is about you. Toxic Free Future did a case study on where these trains carrying vinyl chloride travel throughout the United States and how many people and how many school districts are within 1 mile of that. I was showing a friend from Wisconsin around East Palestine today, and I showed her we have three gas stations that basically sit right on the tracks. What if that thing would have hit one of those gas stations? Our fire department sits right on the railroad tracks. You know, so these chemicals travel through our towns every single day. And if you're like I was, lived there 47 years, you think of the dangers of the tracks. Well, I don't want my car to stall on the tracks. I don't want my foot to get caught walking across it. Never once did I think about a train full of chemicals derailing in my community. You know, you talk about, you know, living. I feel like I've been living a lie my whole life. You know, I thought I had this government that protected me, this government that would take care of me. And what I've seen in these past 2 years, I actually apologize to all the people that I called crazy conspiracy theorists. I was the crazy one. You know, and that mentally, it's hard to realize that you've been wrong your entire life. That, you know, I could have died thinking I lived in the greatest country in America where we took care of our citizens. You know, and now I learn they'd rather take and throw their money in their Ukraine before they give it to their residents in North Carolina that are still living in tents, before they give it to the people in East Palestine that haven't even gotten a bottle of water from our government, before they give us health insurance. And this is most definitely an issue for everyone. A working man issue, who do you think they put in to these factories where they create these chemicals? My stepdad, bricklayer union, his whole life, when he was young, they'd go in and tear up asbestos with no PPE on. You know why? Because they come into poor communities, they offer high-paying jobs, and when you're 20 years old, you feel invincible. You're trying to provide for your family. You know, you don't even think what you're doing to your body. These plants that manufacture these chemicals, these plants that use these chemicals. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, there are so many jobs that are impacted by this, so many people. And if you're like me and thought it's never going to happen here, you know, you watch this stuff on TV, oh, it'll never happen here. It can. And for people that think this is a political issue, that train didn't ask which way I voted. And it's not going to ask which way you vote. You know, and I say that politics have no room in the issues when it comes to human life. They're literally playing politics with my daughter's life while they hold up the railroad safety bill.
Yeah.
They're playing politics with your life, you know. This is not about politics. This is about human life. And, you know, that's why I feel so drawn to the human health aspects of it and the research aspect of it. You know, you talk about them pouring money into the Ukraine. Pour some money into this research for East Palestine. You're never going to have a group of people that you can expose to this many chemicals at once. Do the research now. Make sure another community, because this will happen again. You know, it's not a matter of if, it's when it happens again. This research could help your community. It could make sure that no other community goes through what we've had to go through here in East Palestine. Why don't you pour that money into there? And you know what? For me, at least if my daughter has to watch me die of cancer at 15, because, you know, we keep hearing nobody died. Nobody died yet. And if you've ever watched someone die of cancer, it's not a beautiful death at all. But if my daughter has to watch me go through that at 15, if I have to watch her go through that, at least there would be some sense of meaning out of all this. You know, the meaning being that we helped another community. You know, maybe I have to suffer, maybe my child has to suffer, but I want to make sure that no one has to suffer the way our community has suffered again. And we still need help. Not one bottle of water from our government, not one bottle of water. With the price of groceries, people can barely afford to feed their families, let alone cooking and bathing. Some people are still bathing in bottled water. People are still living in contaminated homes. We need to be relocated out of these contaminated homes. We need health insurance. The very, very least we deserve is health insurance. Even people that have health insurance, it doesn't cover these chemical exposures. We need research money. We need help. We're desperate for help. I don't want to be waiting around for 40 years like they had to do in Bhopal. I don't want to be talking 40 years later to other communities that are going through the exact same thing that we went through, like Marilyn Leisner from Times Beach, like Luella Kenny from Love Canal. You know, these people have been fighting for 40 years. After 2 years, I feel forgotten. I feel abandoned. Sometimes it's hard to wrap my head around the corruption that I've seen. When the CDC said not to test us for vinyl chloride, I thought there's no way in hell the CDC said not to test us for vinyl chloride. When we find proof of it, you know, I call a friend that I met that lived through the BP oil spill. And you know what she said? They're still doing that. That's been my greatest sense of sanity, is talking to these other communities, seeing this playbook and watch them repeat the same mistakes time after time after time again. And now is the time. Everybody in the United States, I don't care if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, if you work on these trains, if you live around a train track, everyone needs to come together. We need to stand in solidarity, and we may need to make changes now that may protect you in the future. Mm-hmm. End of rant.
No. There's nothing else to be said. I think you could not have put it more succinctly. The only thing I had was a joke about Sarah in the Bible.
No.
I thought that.
But when the workers know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're hearing people say, when the workers know.
Yeah. But people misunderstand this idea that, and maybe it was intended to protect us, the EPA and the CDC, but all of them have been submerged by the corporate greed, you know what I'm saying? The railroads buy out, the FRA, the airlines and them buy out the NTSB, and they're going to give you a report. But they're going to leave out what I've found to be crucial pieces of information because they're not going to put the railroads in a position where change becomes an important outcome. The working class has to get beyond the divide of race, the divide of party, and start to see themselves as a whole, because it's the working class that suffer through all these things. And if we don't, it is going to take these incidents, and if we can connect these incidents with other incidents and make people understand this is us, all of us, then we're going to be able to push that change. And I think we have to, that's why I said when we talk about justice, justice is making sure that this doesn't happen to somebody else tomorrow, right? Justice is making sure that the people who live in within that zone of contamination, because I was just looking at flour. You mean if I burn flour, I'm going to kill myself? You know what I mean? Like, who would have thought that, right? So they give you this, oh, well, you know, this was all flour. Until you find out that if you burn the sucker, you have these issues. So they're not here for us. If they were intended to be here for us, that mission has died and it's going to get worse. Because when you put the billionaires in charge of things, they will never see the interests of the working class. Not because they're bad people, it's just not their interest.
No, they are bad people.
You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, my interest is to make money,
Yeah.
right? And so my interest is always going to be to protect the ability to make that money. And so that we're going to have to start to walk and talk differently. We were having this conversation this morning, and I think that what's happening now and what's going to happen over the next several years, and this actually to me started with the election of Obama. And the election of Obama told America was saying we're tired of what's going on. Something's wrong. Let's go get this black guy because they've been catching hell. This black guy gonna straighten this thing out. And then they found out that that black guy was as white as any white man they ever ran upon. And so we got Trump. They can't bribe him. He's crazy as hell. He's a rank outsider. And then they found out class interest prevails. I'm a billionaire like the rest of these people. And so we sent for Joe, poor Joe, because Joe had an opportunity to have done something impactful here, right? Since he's the working class guy and he's so empathetic and what have you.
And his son died from chemical
And his son died
exposure
from, right, exactly,
to
right.
burn pits, and now we have the doctor that was integral in Gulf War illness studying us.
Yeah. So we always miss these points where society can really evolve into being in a better space. And our job here, what little I can do, I'm willing to do it. And I came not to say anything except to just express my solidarity. And whatever I can do, whatever little bit I can do, if it's to buy a bottle of soda, I'll do that. But we have to change the nature of how our system works, because we're about to enter a very dark stage. And we have been on that road for a long time, but we are in the middle of that tunnel now and there are no lights. And if we as a class, because none of us are going to be invited to the great spaceship that they're building in outer space. We're going to be stuck here in this poisoned planet. And we have to do something if we're going to protect ourselves, because they'll never do it. And I was just so, but your words tonight really just, I didn't want to say anything afterwards. I think we should just cut everything. 'Cause it couldn't have been said any better. It could not have been said any better. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the words that you said here. And we stand with you. We stand with East Palestine. I wish you said Palestine, but it was, I respect it.
One thing I want to say is that we can ship this stuff safely. Because we did it 50 years ago. I did it 50 years ago.
Right.
My dad did it 70 years ago. My grandpa did it 80 years ago.
So I meant to ask you this question, right? Because I think we have to make these comparative notes, because some of us, I know, but some of us are too young to know, right? And we need to make that connection between what was it like and what was the safety record when we had a conductor, an engineer, a fireman, and a caboose, and the train was only 50 cars long, right? What was the safety record then versus today? And I think you have to show it, and you have to make the connection, because people don't know. And we're becoming too accustomed to, somebody said 1,500 derailments since East Palestine. Can you imagine if we had 1,500 plane crashes?
Well,
I mean, think about that for a moment, right?
And,
So-
and to say the size of the train, because, you know, when slack runs in on a train, cars tend to pop up.
Yes.
And for them to say that had nothing to do with it, that car could have popped up, come down on the rail, and then broke that wheel.
Yeah.
We were gonna let her say something because she's in training to be a strong, empowered woman and to speak how she feels.
To my parents' bed, and my mom was like forcing me to go upstairs, I think, to my bed, and though I didn't, but next thing I know, my mom runs into the bedroom, and she's like, "If you come on, put some type of shoes on. We gotta go." And I had no idea what was going on at the time until whenever we got to my aunt's house, my mom finally told me, and she was like, "Oh, a train derailment happened," and I was like, "What's a train derailment?" And she thought it was like, at first, when she didn't know what actually happened, she thought that, 'cause it was like a night that, like, I think it was like football or basketball. It was one of those nights, and she thought one of the students was like going home, and she thought that they hit a train. Until they saw like pictures of like on like Facebook and Snapchat about like, you know, the fire and all of that stuff.
What did you think? What did you think when you got to your aunt?
I didn't really know what was happening still, so I think I just like went to bed because I was so tired and didn't really know what to do.
Did any of your friends from school have to move away?
Yeah, 2 of them had to move away. One was named Jordan, the other was named Braylon. They were 2 of my best friends, and Jordan never came back, but Braylon is kind of back, but she misses most of the school.
What about living in a hotel?
I don't like that. Living in the hotel was just a lot, and like we had a cat, 2 dogs, and there was only a 2 pet like limit at the hotel, so we had to give our cat to our aunt, and it was just crazy.
What about whenever you found out about my heart?
Holy crap.
How sick I was.
I didn't really know what I felt.
Well, you made fun of me for wearing my brawn purse. I had to wear a life vest, which was an external defibrillator in the battery pack, so she called it my brawn purse.
Oh, why didn't you tell me? I could have called it that too.
You were bullying your dad?
I bully everyone, even them.
That's what strong women do.
But were you scared or worried or anything with all that?
I don't know.
Did it seem unreal?
Yeah. But at the same time, it didn't feel like but at the same time, it like felt like not really I was in a horror movie, but like in one of those, you know, like TV huh?
Evie, may I ask how you're feeling now?
That wasn't fair.
Penny is scared.
I'm the voice of God.
There's our confirmation.
The God of Penny's lost in his God.
The voice of God is gonna take me away.
So this is Carrie Duncan, and Carrie is a machinist in Iowa and has been a stalwart in support of these workers. And also, Carrie went to Washington, D.C., where we had a picket at the EPA, and then we went over to the AFL-CIO to have a meeting with Liz Schuler. And she was gone at 2 p.m. on Friday, and no one left a message, and we're still fighting to get a meeting with Liz Schuler. But before I have Carrie on, when our first conference, we contacted unions throughout the country, including in Ohio, to ask them to support the Stafford Act, to support the residents of Stafford, and ask Biden to actually, act, institute the Stafford Act. They wouldn't return the calls, and they were quiet. And you have to ask, why do you think the Democrats lost the election? Would it have something to the fact that you're not going to even stand up for the people of East Palestine? I mean, this is a real question. And Carrie is one of those people who has been fighting in her union for solidarity and struggle with all working people.
My name is Sister Carrie. I'm known by everybody as I'm a labor activist and a human rights activist. I'm a member of I am Machinist Local 1010 and Vice President of Lee County Labor Chapter here with Henry Des Moines County Labor Alliance. I am a proud member of Justice for East Palestine residents and workers. But it's enough of who I am. We're here for all of them. This coalition has been organized in response to the residents and workers still suffering from the horrendous Norfolk Southern train derailment that occurred in February of 2022. The people out there have done wonderful for themselves. I want to reiterate what Sister Penny said, because all of you have done a fantastic job, trying to get everything organized and get attention. But in this country now, we lack that unity. And that's why we formed this group, to be voices with you, together. Our nation's previous leaders should have addressed the concerns immediately when you brought them to their attention. Justice should have been brought to the injured people due to an accident that they had no control over, sadly. We look to our current administration for leadership now. Just simply to do just the right thing. Really, how hard is it? Just do the right thing by enacting the Stafford Act. As I said, when I was out in front of the EPA that day and I looked up to the offices of all those people in that great office there, I said, for the love of God, these are God's people that are innocent bystanders of a disastrous train derailment where toxic chemicals were released into the air that exposed these residents and workers into harm's way, unnecessarily so. Then the intentional, uncontrolled burn of the additional rail cars, well, you know what? They could have been prevented. And instead, it was encouraged on February 16th of 2023. We cannot forget that we live in the United States of America, where railroad tracks unite all of us. That's what's brought us here today. This is our concern, because these are our people. We must bring national awareness to the current administration to enact the Stafford Act now, not sometime in the near future. There needs to be action now. The Justice for East Palestine workers and residents has had conferences from all last year, beginning in March, up until now. We won't give up. We're not giving up on these people. I thought today about the hymn, and I quote the words. I'm not plagiarizing, because we sang this at church this morning. They'll know we are Christians by our love. Resonates the message to all of us. And it should, especially to our leaders of this great country, that we are one. So we ask, where are you at for our people in East Palestine, Ohio? We will work with each other. We will work side by side, and we'll guard human dignity and save human pride. To the elected leadership in Washington, D.C., remember why you are where you are and who you represent in this great country. It's the people of our United States of America. You are not elected to represent yourselves. You are elected to represent us. Do what's right in this current administration. We immediately request that Vice President J.D. Vance coordinate with President Trump and his administration to enact the Stafford Act now for the residents and workers in East Palestine, Ohio, so that our country may begin to heal where there has been wounds. Together, we are one. Thank you.
So John is, as I said, is International Vice President at Large of the Teamsters Union, and he'll talk about a letter he's written to Vice President Vance to get the Stafford Act done. He's raised it also in the Teamsters National Executive Committee. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Steve. And I think I'm going to sort of follow my brother's lead out of New York. Chris was right. What I've heard is heart-wrenching. It is every time we sit down and have to go through this. So there was one analogy Chris made that Steve and I had talked about earlier in the week about the comparison between the airline industry and the tragedies that we've had now, I guess 3 of them within the last few days. And the way that the NTSB, SB, and the FFA actually do follow up and get all the facts and fix the problem. And that's what we need to do. When you think about 1,500 derailments, if that number is correct, that the number of people that get killed is probably greater than the number of people when a plane goes down. And I'm not trying to say that it's any less tragic. It's just as tragic and deserves the same attention given to airline safety. A life is a life, despite how it's lost. And if we can prevent that through our governmental agencies, we should do that. So I took the time to write this letter to J.D. Vance. I'll read it to you guys, and then I'll hand it off to the next speaker. Mr. Vice President, I'm writing you today to make an appeal on behalf of the residents of East Palestine, Ohio. As you're aware, this is the 2nd anniversary of the horrible Norfolk Southern train derailment. Since that time, this community has faced numerous adverse effects, including fatalities and long-term health issues related to the hazardous material spills toxicity. It has caused a once tranquil small town in rural Ohio to become divided, pitting resident against resident. Consider the situation of a resident living in their home after this tragedy. They are ill, they're unable to work, leading to the loss of health care. Their immediate family lacks proper health care. Their home, their largest investment, has almost no market value, and they risk repossession if they hold a mortgage. They are trapped in a toxic box with no escape. It's my understanding that you, former Senator Sherrod Brown, and Governor Mike DeWine have endorsed the application of the Stafford Act for these Americans. I'm in concurrence with you all on your position surrounding this matter. I previously asked for an endorsement from former President Joe Biden, all to no avail and without any response. Your recent election to office was significantly influenced by the working class of this country, seeking solutions and support from your administration. I assert that there is no group more representative of the working class or more in need of the Stafford Act. As your administration implements the changes promise during the campaign, I frequently hear the slogan, promises made, promises kept. I respectfully urge you to uphold this promise. Respectfully, John Palmer. In the mail. And thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm here for the long run with you guys. In the mail. And thank you.
Thank you, John.
And I'm here for the long run with you guys.
Solidarity. Thank you. Thank you, John. So our next speaker is Carol Lang, and Carol is a professor at CUNY College in New York. She's also a member of the AFT Professional Staff Council, PSC union, and she has been fighting to get the union to support this call for the Stafford Act and to support the residents. And she got her union to pass a resolution in support of the Stafford Act, and she's been taking up the fight and would be here if she didn't have to work tomorrow. So welcome, Carol.
I'm happy to be here with everybody. And I'm not only a member of the PSC, but I'm also a member of the United Front Committee for a Labor Party. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because in my union, when Kamala Harris was running for president and all of the Democrats were running, my union was trying to push us to support the Democratic Party. And I got up and I said, our union supported this resolution. Our union sent money to East Palestine. And here we have the president of the strongest country, the most wealthiest country in the world, that is not going to do anything for the East Palestine residents. So that's a good enough reason for me not to support any of these bourgeois, candidates. I have to say that the ruling class in this country has utter contempt for working class people. So when people say, well, I can't get an answer from Biden, nobody wants to respond, they don't seem to care, it's because they really don't care. And so what we need is to show that we have working class solidarity, that we have to support each other, because we should have no expectations that rich people, I think Chris was saying this before, we have different diverging points of view. They want to make as much profit as they possibly can, and that means on the backs of the community, on the backs of working class people, on the backs of railroad workers. And so I have a couple of other things to talk about in terms of healthcare. I mean, it's clear that, which is why in New York City, I'm sure everybody is aware that Luigi Mangione killed the head of the United Healthcare, because they have utter contempt. All they're concerned about is making as much profit as they possibly can. So my question really is to the railroad workers. It's like, why? I mean, every time I read Railroad Workers United, there's somebody else who's been killed. And I'm just wondering, why aren't the railroad workers shutting it? You could shut down the entire country from end to end, more than any other industry, from end to end. Why aren't the railroad workers going out on strike? And every time I see, another incident where somebody has been killed, I'm going like, what is the problem here? We can shut this country down. We can turn it in the direction of doing, good things for working class people. But instead, the health insurance companies, which I mentioned before, continue to want to just make as much as they possibly can. So in New York City, and this is going to be happening across the country, we have been fighting for the last 3 years not to allow the mayor and the ruling class essentially to turn Medicare into Medicare Advantage, which is what they've been trying to do. I mean, essentially, we have gone on demonstrations in 90-degree weather, in 5-degree weather, to demand that the mayor, who is in the pocket of the insurance companies, and now because he's in a lot of trouble, he's in the pocket of Trump and is trying to get a pardon from Trump. essentially, I'm not sure if people are aware of what's happening with Medicare Advantage, but it's privatizing Medicare, which basically means that people who are over 65 will absolutely not get the health care that they need. And they're counting on people just dropping dead because it's cheaper than to give them the things that they need to make people healthy, whole, and well. And so, the working class, as I said, is the only means by which, we have to demand that Vance support and invoke the Stafford Act. But the only way that's going to happen is if he thinks that we are united, that we are strong, that we are going to stand up, and that the railroad workers will go out on strike. Because other than that, they don't have any particular reason to do anything to support working class people. Just the final thing, we just negotiated a contract in New York City. Now, this is besides San Francisco, is not only the wealthiest city in the country, but the most expensive. And while, the United States is sending gobs and gobs of weapons to Ukraine and giving tax cuts, and you can have expectations that that's going to happen very soon now that Trump is the president, and yet they can't afford to pay their public workers. So the majority of us got such a terrible contract that it's impossible for me to think that people will be able to continue to work at the city university because there's just the salary doesn't match with the cost of living. And so I'm making a plea to everybody, if anybody outside of here or inside of here hears this, the working class has to be united. It has to organize general strikes. It has to show these people who are utterly contemptuous of us, who don't care if we live or die, that we care, that we live, and that the way to do that basically is to unite as a powerful working class, vote for not only establish a labor party, but also vote to walk and to stop working, because that's the power that the working class has, which is the power that the ruling class is terrified of. So good luck to everybody.
Thank you, Carol. Mike Bolanek is a videographer, filmmaker. He also organized a conference in Toledo, Ohio, in solidarity with the East Palestine residents and workers, and talked about what's going on in East Palestine as far as their environmental struggles as well. So welcome, Mike.
As he said, my name is Mike Bolanek, filmmaker from Toledo, Ohio. Kind of started off getting into filmmaking with the Toledo water crisis in Toledo, Ohio, if you're not familiar. We have issues with massive factory farms basically dumping poop straight into our watershed, which then feeds algal blooms into these massive things. I mean, if you see any kind of radar image or satellite image of Lake Erie, the entire western side of Lake Erie is just neon green. And so that kind of got me into the whole sacrifice zone thing. And as I was kind of contemplating putting together that documentary, unfortunately, this situation here happened. And I kind of knew right away, like, first off, this wasn't going to go well. Like, I knew immediately pretty much all the stuff that George talked about. Like, I knew all that was going up in the air. It was going to mix together. I know when you mix the chemicals together, they become other chemicals. How are you going to know what all that stuff is? So all of that stuff that George presented there just confirmed the stuff that I had suspected all along. And once I kind of knew that, I felt this is something that definitely needs to be talked about. Like, I don't know that I'm the guy that has the platform to do it, but I need to help. I really think that this is just really the most egregious case of something like this happening. Those images of that mushroom cloud, nobody can deny that. It is just sickening when you see that. And so, I mean, all of these things, I think, fortunately and unfortunately for this, build a really strong case for you guys.
and builds a really strong case for major reforms in this country. Some of the stuff that Jeff was talking about with the railroad industry and the length of cars and all of that stuff that's really important. The braking mechanisms, I hear that they had cut out the good one, basically. They don't let you guys use the good one.
I could go into that.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But you don't even have to have that expensive one.
Yeah.
If you run shorter trains and put discretionary power on it, you've got a good braking system.
Right.
But we won't do that because it doesn't pay the shareholders to do that.
Right. And these are all simple reforms. These are all things that we could easily do like that. You pass a law, make it happen. The issue is that the people that we have in power don't care. They, a lot of them get in office because people like Norfolk Southern help them get into office. And honestly, I think the solution that we need, and actually Jamie and I had talked about this a while back, we need more people like Dr. Rick Chai. People who are just regular working people who go out and run for office. On both sides, we need this. And we need to flood primaries. And I remember you had said this last time around, we need to start at the bottom. Don't worry about the top here yet. Let's focus on school boards. Let's focus on city councils, mayors, that sort of thing. And, I mean, as you had said, and you were brilliant in pointing that out last time, that's going to do it. People will shake in their boots when they see the working class coming together and taking over these positions in office. And we can do it. If you get 5 people to primary that one person that's in office, chances are one of those 5 people are going to win, not that one person. They're going to split that guy's vote. And so, I mean, this is all very doable. We just have to have the willpower to do it. And so I really didn't have anything planned at all to say, and I think that's pretty much the gist of what I think needs to be said by someone like me who doesn't actually live here but is here to support you guys. So anything that you guys need, just let me know. I appreciate all of you, and thank you very much.
I have one thing to say. You're a dookie head.
A little bit, yes, sometimes.
The point I wanted to make, you don't need legislation. You don't need anything for this. But if what they told you is true to the way they think, all they have to do, monitor unplanned train separations. In other words, every time a train comes apart, report it to the FRA. Because what's going to happen, once you get rid of a lot of those, you're going to find derailments are going to plummet. Chris works out there, so he knows. This is going to happen. I can't believe, because I saw the CEO of the American Association of Railroads was on CNBC about a year ago. And I watched it because a good friend of mine was on there making the case for us. But this guy said, we find no correlation between train size and derailments. And I almost fell out of my chair. I thought, and I put this in the article that I just wrote, I can run into that wall face first, and I don't need a study to tell me I'm going to probably hurt myself. But that's what the railroads are doing. They're not going to do the studies, and they're going to tell you, don't believe your eyes, your lying eyes and ears. Don't believe the science. Don't believe 1 and 1 is 2. Believe what we tell you. So just get the FRA to monitor these unplanned train separations and cut down on those. See what happens to the derailments. Because I know I'm right. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say. That's the easy thing that we can do.
Again, what creates the unplanned train separations?
Well, it's usually the in-train forces, the slack, when it runs in. And one of the things that happens when a train, the rear end of a train runs into the rest of the train, is it will pop cars up. They'll actually come off the rail, and then they'll come back down. Sometimes they just pop out, and that causes a derailment. So, and I've gotten fights with the FRA before, and one of the things I used to tell them is every time we have one of these unplanned train separations, All that is a prelude to a derailment. And they said, well, yeah. But I mean, everybody that works out there knows this stuff. But that's why it was so frustrating for me when the FRA and the NTSB won't listen to us and puts out, I'm going to say it, puts out drivel like they put in this report. So, there's some very easy things. Before the legislation, there's very easy things that we can do to stop all this madness.
What are they?
Monitor these unplanned train separations and then cut down on them. Reduce the in-train forces, and you will watch the derailments plummet, and then it is train size. I know that's going to happen, but they won't do that. I mean, and it's such an easy thing to do.
Because there's too many cars, too much weight.
But that's what would cause the in-train forces.
I just don't have you saying that. I would love to get
that.
that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, hey, Jeff, I remember in Iowa you had made kind of explained it as like the cars going up and down hills.
Oh, yeah.
The reason why.
Yeah, and to illustrate how long these trains are, where I live, the head end of a freight train will be in Fort Madison, Iowa, changing crews. The rear end is all the way over in Niota, Illinois. It's the rear end of that train is not only in another town, it's in another state. And when it goes around curves, when it goes up and down little hogbacks, when it goes up and because a train that long will be going over hills and down hills at the same time. That's what creates these differences in speed in the same train. And that's what creates all the in-train forces that you don't want. And I could get into the braking. One of the things, because you said something about that, one of the things that I noticed was when the engineer was trying to stop, he used none of the air brakes, which struck me as funny, because if I was told that a hot box detector caught me, I would set the air on the cars and settle down those in-train forces, because that's what the air brakes in the car will do. It will settle down those forces. But railroads, and I know this for a fact because we did it too, and from what I heard, the NS might be doing it. I don't know for sure, but they would discourage you from using the air brakes because of the fact that it wears out brake shoes and stupid stuff like that.
The hand brakes.
What's that?
They just wanted you to use the hand brakes.
No, they wanted us to use what they call the dynamic brake on the locomotives, which is an electronic brake, but that only brakes the locomotive. So, like in this case, you had 3 locomotives that were braking and 150 cars that were bouncing around like ping pong balls, albeit 130-ton ping pong balls. But they're just going all over, and
Is it like using a Jake brake on a truck?
Yeah. But you were talking about the lateral movement, the side by side. That happens too because of using a dynamic brake. But the air brakes under the car will settle that down. And there's reason they might not have done that because they wanted to settle the slack or the in-train forces before they set the air. But if that's the case, the train was too damn long. So, it comes down to the trains are too long. There are too many forces that you can't control.
I'm Vina Colley from the Portsmouth Gas and Diffusion Plant in Piketon, Ohio. Our group is PRESS, Portsmouth Piketon Residents for Environmental Safety and Security, and National Nuclear Workers for Justice. The Piketon site was a secret site because we did stuff for the military and for the DOE and DOD. Our job was never talked about or what the people were being exposed to or the community. And we had fought for the compensation for the workers, and there's 21 cancers right now that they are giving the workers without a benefit of the doubt because they destroyed their badges and they destroyed their records, so they can't prove their exposures. So there's supposed to be an SEC site, which means a spatial exposure cohort. And they were supposed to automatically give these workers compensation if they had one of the 22 cancers. Well, they're still fighting a lot of the workers. And like East Palestine, we were under secrecy. We didn't know about these exposures. And right now we're looking at the aquifer because they have, one is the Brea and one is the Gallia. And underneath that is the Taze River Valley. And there's a lot of people, it goes up northward through Ohio and all the way to Indiana and on down. So we think that, and by some records, that the aquifer is already contaminated. And so that means people who live from up Ohio, clear up to the Indiana border are being affected by the drinking water. The other part of water that we have goes into the Scioto River, from Little Beaver Creek, Big Beaver Creek to Scioto River. And then this water goes into the Ohio River, 20 miles from the plant. So we are exposing more people in another direction all the way down to the Mississippi. And so they've been able to cover up, and we've had all kind of experts in here. And so we're now trying to get RECA for the community, and Senator Brown and JD Vance was for that. And I'm hoping, I've sent them a big press packet, that we get it. But unlike East Palestine, when they had their incident, it was a national covered story. Everybody knows. I don't understand why they are fighting them for the Stafford Act and giving them their money and their health and their homes. They need to move those people out of there. I mean, from what I've seen and what I've heard and what I read, it's a very toxic place, and the whole world knows it. So why they are fighting these people, I don't understand. Like in Piketon, we have homes right up to the gas diffusion plant, and they're wanting to put in two small modular reactors, and they're starting the HALU, where they're going to be enriching high assay uranium for weapons. And so they keep this all a secret. But, East Palestine is not a secret. I talk to people all the time online to talk about those people in East Palestine. And I've been to a lot of the meetings. I'm on their board. And we would think, I mean, I even drove to Washington, D.C. to support them so they would get the Stafford Act. And I'm hoping if JD Vance comes there tomorrow, that he goes through with what he's told you guys and what they have told us. Our government and these agencies are putting out reports that are inconclusive by design. That is a criminal act. And they're all going by paperwork and studies that were done in the 1900s. And we're living by that process today, and that's why they keep fighting all of us and not being able to find anything. But they know the effects of these chemicals and what they do to them. So if they don't give you all the Stafford Act, I think they should be locked up. And I also think it's good to educate our representatives about what's going on at East Palestine and the train derailments, because these people carry toxic chemicals. At Piketon, they brought in these depleted uranium cylinders, and railroad workers were sitting on the cylinders. And this railroad worker that told me that, he died a horrible death of cancer. So they're shipping this stuff all over the world. And we just had a train that derailed last week. And from what they've told everyone, they only had soybeans on the trains that wrecked. And I think it was it might have tipped over maybe 8 of them. So what if that soybeans had been more radiation and chemicals? We would be in the same shape that East Palestine is right now. So this is an emergency, and we need to help the East Palestine people to get the Stafford Act. Actually, we should have, as rich as America is, we should have universal health care. And to take away people's health care, they're trying to do that all over now, I guess. is a crime. We've got to stand up for ourselves and we've got to fight these criminals. And I won't keep you all too long because I know you're tired and been at it all day. But I won't be able to make it tomorrow, but I'll be there with you in my heart and I'll be on the video watching it. And I'm here to support. We support the people of East Palestine. And thank you for having me. And I am a former worker at the plant, and I have fought all kind of issues because I worked at the plant that the toxic chemicals and the radiation cause. And some of those illnesses that the DOL has recognized is Brilliant disease, chronic lung disease, heart disease, thyroid, neuropathy. And these are just some conditions that they recognize, and not only some of the conditions, but sometimes when you have consequential illnesses, they're even paying for those. So let's get that Stafford Act in and get it ready for these people to move out of that community. And I thank you for having me. It's the Portsmouth Gas Diffusion Plant. Some called it. It used to be the Goodyear Atomic Plant from 1980 to 85, and then they left out, and now they have so many contractors in there, you can't find them all. And Centrus is trying to push for the Halo, and I don't know which company's pushing for the small modular reactors, but Piketon reprocessed reactor fuel from 1950 until now, and they've got caught because we have the records about plutonium, and we were only supposed to be a uranium enrichment facility. And so people all around should be worried about this plant because it's contaminating a lot of water. We have the largest aquifer underneath the Piketon site, and they put 12 waste cells. And from my understanding, the liners are supposed to last for 1,000 years, but I think they're already leaking. And I know beavers can come there and chew a hole in these liners. And they're, like I said, they're over top of the Taze River Valley, if you've ever heard of the Taze River. And then all of our discharges and the contamination that went off site goes all the way down to the Ohio River to the Mississippi. So we're poisoning a lot of people from this plant. There, USCC's there, Centrus is there. I don't know how many. There must be 20 groups in there doing different work with different names. They're trying to disassemble all the buildings and put them in these 12 waste site facilities that they put on site.
When the engineer was trying to stop, he used